I want to give a real quick thank you to everybody who submitted fan art over the years and has sent it in. And as we are going over this, I want to go ahead and let you guys know as well that we are almost at 4,000 subscribers. This is, it's amazing to me that we're actually growing at the rate we are on this channel. So thank you very, very much. I greatly appreciate it. That all said, guys, we got to talk about a deck that I want to show you all. I'm not the biggest fan of Spellslinger strategies because, as I've said before, I've built them repeatedly, whether it be Veyron or Gazaleth or the new one that just came out of the pre-con. I've been trying to enjoy Spellslinger, and the only time that I've really liked it has been when I built Izzet, because it gave me a different kind of Spellslinger strategy, a blinking Spellslinger strategy, where I'm playing more of a control deck that gets to sit back and let its commander be a giant beating waffle. So when I tell you that I have another Spellslinger deck that I think I personally would enjoy a ton, I hope you understand the gravity of that for what this deck can do. I think this is one of the most unique design spaces, and it actually reminds me a lot of Izzet for some of the same reasons that I like Izzet, because of the deck building restriction it imposes on us. Now, let's talk about today's commander, Lila the Undefeated Slickshot. She's got Prowess, she's a 3-mana 3/3, and whenever you cast a multicolored instant or sorcery spell from your hand, exile the spell as it resolves instead of putting it in your graveyard. If you do, it becomes plotted, and plotting basically means you can cast it at sorcery speed on a later turn without paying its mana costs. Now, Lila's an interesting commander because the way she works is she allows us to get double dipping on spells, but strangely, she has Prowess, which feels like it's for a different deck. A Prowess commander really wants to be in a Storm deck, and multicolored instants and sorcery spells do not work for a Storm deck if they are all you have, because it is very rare to find them at the mana cost that you would need to effectively storm off. So this gives us an interesting conundrum. How do we build a deck like this? Lila looks like she wants to be in the 99 of a Izzet deck, and I'm actually going to be getting one to put in the 99 of my Izzet deck. That deck keeps on getting updated every time a new set comes out, I swear to Josh. But this commander, the way we are going to build her, we are going to build her in the way that I've always wanted a good Spellslinger deck to be built, in that it has big, flashy, dirtily spells, and then it gets maximum value out of those spells. And we have to build it this way because we are limited to only like 67 instant and sorceries in all of Magic the Gathering, so we get to pick like almost 30 of those to use, and then the rest are basically chaff due to a variety of reasons. For instance, in an earlier version of this deck and this video, I put in a card called Expansion Explosion, and it turns out that card doesn't work for Lila at all, because the copying effect of Expansion Explosion has to be used on the stack, and there's no way to get around plotting. So this puts us in an awkward scenario. We are in a very, very restrictive deck build. But you know what? Sometimes the most restrictive deck builds are the most fun. So let's talk about the first thing we're going to be doing with the deck. Lila is already giving us a pseudo-copying effect with her ability by allowing us to throw things into the plot zone and cast them again for free. So why don't we go ahead and triple and quadruple dip on that effect by adding in a bunch of ways to copy spells into the deck itself, starting with Najal Storm Runner. This card says you can cast instant or sorcery spells as though they had flash, and it says whenever it attacks, you may pay 2 to copy your next instant or sorcery spell. So what this is going to let us do is it's going to let us use some of our more unwieldy sorceries on the opponent's turns and then cast them at normal sorcery speed on our turn due to the plot restriction, but it also allows us another realm of copying our abilities. This also works as a very good lieutenant for our commander if she is not on the board due to, you know, unaliving reasons. Teach by Example can copy our next instant and sorcery spell, and then we can choose new targets for the copy. We can use this early game just to get it in the plot zone, use it on like Expressive Iteration or some other cheap spell early, and then use it on a big dirtily spell later, because you can use the plotted card at any point on a subsequent turn as long as it's at sorcery speed. Galvanic Iteration is the same thing, but it's a bit more powerful because this card has flashback. So we get to cast this card from our graveyard the third time we need it. First time we cast it from our hand, second time from plot, third time from graveyard. Ultimately, 5 mana to copy a spell 3 times over the course of multiple turns. That's a pretty good return on investment as far as I'm concerned. The Nivix Guildmage gives us another potential lieutenant for our commander, giving us the ability to pay 4 mana instead of 2 mana to copy an instant or sorcery spell, which, if we have a good, big, dirtily plotted spell, it doesn't matter too much that we're sinking mana into that ability. It also gives us the ability to mana sink into looting and sculpting our hand out. Baral and Kari Zev will allow us to 1-2 punch all of our spells. Whenever you cast your first instant or sorcery spell, cast a subsequent one that has less mana value but shares a card type with it. The deck has 10 sorceries and 19 instants, so this card will almost always allow you to cast a double entendre of spells. Also, it says whenever you cast your first instant or sorcery spell, it doesn't care where it's casted from. So the mana value of a spell being determined when it's on the stack and not based on how much mana you spend into it means that we can plot a sorcery and then hold on to it until we have a sorcery in our hand, cast the free sorcery, and then Baral and Kari Zev will allow us to subsequently cast another free sorcery. This card has a lot of nutty applications if you are willing to put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's holding on to those spells long enough to use them. There's also a second bit of text on here that says that if you don't, you can make Ragavan, but like, come on, you're not going to be doing that. Not really. Swarm Intelligence allows you to copy any instant or sorcery spell you cast, and Double Vision allows you to do the same thing so long as it's for the first instant or sorcery spell you would cast during a game. So that gives us a bunch of ways to copy our spells, but we still need to figure out a few other things. We need to be able to ramp up 2 big dirtly spells. We need to be able to draw through our deck so our deck we have the spells in our hand in the first place, and we need to keep our commander on the board long enough to cast those spells via protecting the commander and interacting with our opponent's game pieces. So let's start with a very hefty ramp package to begin with, and this is going to begin with, of course, Fire Diamond and Sky Diamond. It is an Izzet deck, so it needs blue and red mana, and the Diamond cycle gives us cheap access to that. Then we have Honored Heirloom, an easy way to get rid of graveyard stuff at instant speed, while also being an add 1 mana of any color rock. Just I love Honored Heirloom. The Rainbow Rock goes in every deck. Then we have Mere Convert, a 2 mana rock that looks like a creature and makes us pay 2 life for the ability to get all of that beautiful mana. I love cards like Mere Convert because they allow us to build decks very, very cheap, and they just don't cost that much money. Then we have Wayfarer's Bauble. Use it to sack itself and get in any island or mountain from our deck, as long as they are basics, onto the battlefield. Then we have Arcane Signet and Izzet Signet, 2 signets that can tap for the colors that our deck needs. And then we get into the other half of our ramp package, probably the more important half for what our deck is trying to do. These are the cards that are going to be cheating the costs of our spells. This is Mocking Sprite. Instant or sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Goblin Electromancer does the same thing. Vadric does the same thing, but it's based on its power, and it introduces the absolutely fun day and night mechanic to your table so that nobody will be upset that they invited you to the playgroup. Ever. Use Vadric and make people upset at you. But Vadric can reduce the cost of spells by a lot depending on the circumstances of the game. Haughty Djinn reduces their cost by 1, and its power is equal to the instant sorceries in our grave, so it could potentially be a secondary win con as well. Mizzix of Magnus allows us to cast instant or sorcery spells of a great, like, bigger and bigger ones for lesser mana, because it lowers the cost of them by 1 for every experience counter you have, and every time you cast an instant or sorcery spell with more mana value than the experience counters we have, then you get to drop that cost even more, and the experience counters never go away. This card's great because as we're doubling up on our spells with our plot mechanic, Mizzix of the Magnus will see all of that. Speaking of Magnus, Magnus the Red is in here too. Instant and sorcery spells cost 1 less for every creature token you control, and of course Magnus of the Red will make those creature tokens as well. There's a couple other cards in the deck that make creature tokens too. This can possibly lead us to just winning a game. This is one of the few ways we have to basically storm off, but it's not going to happen all that often. But when it does, it's going to be funny as heck because it's with big Haymaker cards. Case of the Ransacked Lab lowers the cost of instant and sorcery spells by 1. And if you solve it by casting 4 or more instant and sorcery spells a turn, easy to do with the plot mechanic, it becomes solved, in which case whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, we will then draw a card. Then we have Wizards of They, a card with Myriad that says instants and sorceries cost 1 less, and this is another way we can get our sorceries to be cast at instant speed, freeing them up for easier shenanigans with plot. That doesn't mean that you can cast the plotted cards at instant speed, that just means that you can cast the sorceries at a more of your leisurely pace so that they are available for plotting. Doing it on player 3's turn and your player 4 so that you can then play your spells one turn after another. It causes things to feel a little smoother in the brain. I'm not saying you're a smooth brain, but, you know, we are playing Izzet Spellslinger. It's pretty straightforward. Kidding. Next, we need to keep our commander protected. So we're going to have a Champion's Helm, Mirror Shield, and Giant's Amulet as ways of giving our commander hexproof. Reasons why I'm glad Champion's Helm is now a cheap budget option that people have access to. So I go on about this next section a lot in videos, and I think it's important to go about it again now. This is the interaction and removal suite we are running, and most of them will benefit from the plotting mechanic. A few of them will not, but let's go ahead and go into which ones we are looking at. Cunning Strike deals 2 damage to a creature and then 2 damage to a player and then draws us a card. Of course, this will happen twice because of our commander's ability, so that is excellent. Prophetic Bolt hits a target for 4, and then we look at the top 4 cards of our library and put one of them into our hand and the rest on the bottom. Just an easy cantrip along with a kill spell. Then we have Rowl's Outburst, deal 3 damage to any target, then look at the top 2 cards of our library, put one into our hand and the other into the graveyard. Another, just a mini Prophetic Bolt, basically. Creative Outburst, this is one of our big dirtle spells that we want to get maximum value out of. Deal 5 to any target, look at the top 5 cards of our library, put one into our hand and the rest on the bottom in any order, or we can discard it to ramp. These are all the same card. Creative Outburst, Rowl's Outburst, and Prophetic Bolt. These are all the exact same card, just with varying levels of power. Negate is an easy access counterspell that will not benefit from plot, but will allow us to protect our commander. Master of the Way draws us a card, then deals damage equal to a target creature or player equal to the number of cards in our hand. Ideally, our hand should be at a 6 or 7 all the time, you know, like every commander deck you've ever heard about. So this card should be able to give us what we need. Ionize is a 2-color counterspell that deals 2 damage to that spell's controller afterwards. It will not benefit from the plot, however, so please be wary of that. Gandalf's Sanction can deal X damage to a creature, where X is the number of instant and sorceries in our graveyard, and then excess damage is dealt to that creature's controller instead. An easy way to just break somebody's soul after breaking their Llanowar Elf. Izzet Charm can counter a spell and then blow up a creature if you choose to use its plotting ability. Not its plotting ability, our commander's plotting ability. Counter a spell early and then use it to draw 2 cards, discard 2, or deal 2 damage to a creature later in the game. Electrolyze deals 2 damage divided as you choose among 1 or 2 target creatures or players, and then draws us a card. Beacon Bolt can deal damage to a creature equal to the number of instant and sorceries in our grave, and it has Jumpstart, so we get 1 Beacon Bolt for 3, 1 Beacon Bolt for free, and then subsequent Beacon Bolts for the Jumpstart cost of discarding a card in addition to paying its other costs, then exiling it. Then we have Firemind's Research. Whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, put a charge counter on it, and then we can remove 2 charge counters to draw a card, or remove 5 to deal 5 damage to any target. So most of our removal is going to be damage-based, so be wary of Indestructible. You will need to politic around a bit to deal with that, unless you want to add a Chaos Warp into the deck. Prismari Command deals 2 damage to a target, then it lets you draw 2 cards or discard 2 cards. Then you can blow up an artifact, then you can make a treasure token. I say then, I'm lying to you. It's a choose 2 ability. Pick whichever 2 work for you, and you can change those targets later on in the game as well if you have this plotted. So, hey, I'm going to blow up your thing for 2, and then I'm going to draw 2, discard 2 because I need new cards. But I'm going to use it plotted later to blow up an artifact, and then also make a treasure token because I want more mana. Like, it just... Prismari Command's wonderful. I've ran it in Modern for years. Then we have Role Reversal. 3 mana, exchange control of 2 target permanents that share a permanent type. Give somebody one of our creature tokens we're making, and then take their commander away from them. That's a way we can have to get around indestructible effects. Or we could be like, hey, you can have my mana rock. I'll take your Bolas' Citadel. Then we have Slick Sequence. Deals 2 damage to any target. If you cast another spell this turn, draw a card. Very easy to use this with the plotting mechanic. Of course, it came out in Thunder Junction, so it makes sense. But Now we got to talk about how we're digging through our deck, and we've got a lot of ways to dig through our deck. We are trying to make sure that our hand is always filled with lots of spells so that we can fill our second hand with lots of spells via plotting. So let's begin with Academy Wall. Every instant or sorcery spell we cast lets us draw a card and discard a card once each turn. Hypothesis makes us draw 2 cards, and then we can choose to blow up, get rid of a non-land card to deal 4 damage to any target creature if we want. Then we have Practical Research, draw 4, discard 2 unless we can't discard an instant or sorcery card. Arcane Infusion lets us look at the top 4 of our library, put an instant or sorcery into our hand, and then it has flashback, so we can use it again. So again, cards with flashback, cards with jumpstart, we basically get 3 times. We get it once, and then we get it twice because of the plotting mechanic of our commander, and then we get it a 3rd time because of the flashback mechanic. Crom says our second spell each turn will let us draw a card, and then we get to put a 1/1 counter on Crom. Lunar Mystic lets us say whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, pay 1 to draw a card. Thought Flare lets us draw 4 cards, discard 2. Channel Force lets us discard X cards and then make a player draw X cards and then deal X damage to one creature or a planeswalker with it. This is basically removal as well, but I like it in the draw section because that's what it's primarily doing for us. Then we have Invert Invent. This is a very interesting effect in our deck. So its 1 mana ability says switch the power and toughness of each of 2 target creatures. Not super important. Its 6 mana effect says search your library for an instant or sorcery card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. You get to do that for an instant and a sorcery card. We get to get both. Now, the reason this is cool with our commander is we get to pay 1 early game with the plot mechanic, and then we get to play this for free on the invent side later because we get to choose which side of this we want to use. The card, like a double tutor for free, is fantastic. Then we have Truth or Consequences. Each player secretly votes for Truth or Consequences. You draw a card for every Truth vote, and then you choose an opponent at random, and you get to deal 3 damage to them for every Consequences vote. The fact that we get to double or triple up on this just is beautiful. It will keep people away from choosing Consequences, but if they do choose Consequences, oh boy, howdy, do we get to make one player's life absolutely miserable. Steam Augury says reveal the top 5 of our library, separate them into 2 piles, and opponent chooses one of those piles, puts that into our hand, and the other into the graveyard. Just, it's a reverse factor fiction. Ill-Timed Explosion, draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. When you do, Ill-Timed Explosion will deal X damage to each creature where X is the greatest mana value of cards discarded this way. This card is technically our one and only board wipe, as we are not in the budget to run things like Blasphemous Act, even though it's only $1. But Ill-Timed Explosion is a choice. You can either just use it to draw 2 cards, period, or you may discard 2 cards and then get the Ill-Timed Explosion effect. Your pick. Archmage Emeritus says when you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, draw a card. Tome of the Guild Pack says when you cast a multicolored spell, draw a card, and you can tap it to add a mana of any color. Jorian Ruin Diver says when you cast your second spell, draw a card, just like Crom. And Expressive Iteration. This is one of the best cards with plot. Look at the top 3 of your library, put 1 into your hand, 1 into exile, 1 to the bottom of the deck, and then you can cast the card that was from exile anytime this turn. I love this card. It is all value. Just don't play it on turn 2. Always play it on turn 3 so you can get a land drop out of it. And finally, how are we winning the game? What is our end goal? What is our game plan? Obviously, a lot of our instants and sorceries deal damage to creatures and players, and this can further eke us into a victory. Our commander has the prowess ability, so this gives us 1 signpost of a potential victory if we manage to storm off on plot. But I think more often than not, we're going to be winning on the backs of cards like Talrand. When you cast an instant or sorcery spell, make a 2/2 creature token with flying. Everybody who's played Spellslinger is familiar with Talrand. He can just very, very quickly get out of hand in making you a giant board, and then we can supplement that board with cards like Teleportal. Target creature gets 1/0 and unblockable until end of turn, or we can overload it, and then that now says each. So with Teleportal, we're never going to gain the overload side of it while it's plotted. This is purely here to overload first and then use it to like finish off a player with our prowess commander later if we so choose. But it's still a fantastic way to turn all of our Talrand creatures into bigger creatures for a big finisher. Then we have Invade the City, amass X, where X is the number of instant and sorceries in our graveyard. This combos very nicely with Teleportal. If we're late in the game, Invade the City might make us a creature that's like 15/15 easily, and then Teleportal is going to say, hey buddy, that's a big creature and I've had this plotted for 3 turns. I'm going to make my amass card go pow pow. So this is just use it early. It doesn't matter and then hold on to it until later in the game when you're ready to just do the 1-2 punch of here's invade the city, and now also Teleportal says it's going to just be big and hit hard. Then we have Eris, Roar of the Storm, new card from Thunder Junction. Costs 2 less for each different mana value of instant sorceries in our grave, of which we have a lot of different values because this is a dirtily deck. It has Flying and Prowess, and whenever you cast your second spell each turn, create a 4/4 Dread Dragon elemental creature token with Flying and Prowess. Just easy supplement to the Talrand and Magnus effects we're already running. Then we have Gutter Snipe. When you cast an instant sorcery spell, deal 2 damage to every opponent. Fiery Inscription does the same thing, but with a Ring Temp's ability that we're going to ignore as well. And then finally, possibly the most important card in our deck in terms of winning a game outright. This is Mizzix Mastery. Exile target card that is an instant or sorcery from our graveyard, and for each card exiled this way, copy it without paying its mana cost, and then cast it. And it has Overload for 8. So here's what we're going to be doing. We are going to be plotting and throwing all of our shit into the graveyard throughout the game. You've probably noticed a lot of our cards can throw our own cards into the graveyard over time, either by discarding or doing the fact or fiction thing. Mizzix Mastery is the nail in the coffin for that. So here's an easy way to get rid of the last player on the board during a Mizzix Mastery turn. You use your Mizzix Mastery, use all the instant and sorceries to find some way to kill all the players on the board except maybe one if they survive the onslaught. Very few people survive a Mizzix Mastery, but let's say they do. They're a life gain deck or something else, so like our Gutter Snipe wasn't able to get in there and do the job. Mizzix Mastery is going to trigger Prowess of our commander for every card that we did. And then if we've held up something like Teleportal, that card, that commander is now unblockable. So the Mizzix Mastery is just ripping through them, and then the Teleportal that was either in the graveyard or plotted, however you decided to run that for this particular game, now the commander is unblockable, and it's going to hit somebody for 19, 20 damage. It doesn't matter. At this point, somebody's probably just dead. A few players are probably dead from the amount of just spells and copying spells that we've done to them while casting Mizzix Mastery. And then, of course, our commander is sitting there ready to find that one guy who's playing Aristocrats that's just got a life total of 300, and they're ready to die. And that is those are our win cons. That is how we are planning on getting in there. Our land package is a bit sparser than usual. This is a combination of issues. One, we are in Izzet, and in Izzet, we don't have access to as many dual lands. And two, I wanted to focus the budget on this deck so heavily on the instants and sorceries that the land base ended up being a little bit leaner as a result. So if you are wanting to build this deck, the first thing I would do is upgrade the land base first before doing anything else. Usually I don't find it to be as important because you can build good land bases on a budget, but Izzet specifically suffers from a lack of cards in this regard. But let's go ahead and look at what we have here. In the dual land section, we have Izzet Boiler Works. This is a way to supplement our land plays. I'm not big on tap lands usually, but the fact that with Izzet Boiler Works we can start with a 2-land hand and still be a little bit safer works for us, especially since we have a 3-mana commander. Temple of Epiphany, again, I do not like these cards usually. I would upgrade this into the Karlov Manor searchable version as fast as possible, but in the budget version, it is perfectly reasonable. The Temple will let us scry one when it goes onto the battlefield. That scry is super important because our first few turns are all set up in this deck, and we want to make sure that they happen as easily as possible. And then Frostboil Snarl are untapped dual land. Exotic Orchard and Command Tower can also come into play untapped and can tap for any color. We have 12 basic mountains, 12 basic islands, and then we have Terramorphic Expanse and Escape Tunnel and Evolving Wilds that are all basically the exact same card. Promising Vein and Shire Terrace are the same card as well. They can come into play untapped, or they can search our library for the island or the mountain that we need. Myriad Landscape can search for 2 lands as long as they have the same type and they're basic, so it's basically a ramp spell. And then Ash Barrens can be discarded with its land cycling ability to find the lands that we are missing. And that is basically it for Lila, the undefeated skill shot, or slick shot. She is a very, very interesting commander. She's going to be going into the 99 of my Izzet deck, and I think that she does a fantastic job at making Spellslinger decks a little more interesting. But let's say that you wanted to drop a little more money on your version of the deck. What would you do? How would you go about that? Well, first, let's talk about how you would upgrade the ramping base. Mana base is super easy. I've done a whole video on that, so just go to look at my lands guide video if you need that. But obviously adding in Soul Ring and Worn Power Stone, while they would break our $15 limitation, they certainly would work very well for the deck to make our big dirtly spells a little less complicated to cast. Also, Crackling Spellslinger is another fun doubler you could do. Even though all of our plotted cards have to be cast at sorcery speed, we can just make one of them have Storm if we wanted. If you wanted to get a lot more ways to lower the mana cost on things, get this deck super, super fast on the mana production, then Crackling Spellslinger can be a fun extra haymaker you have access to. And making things less expensive is done very easily by going into the next card, Primal Amulet. All instant sorceries cost 1 less to cast, and then if you can get 4 charge counters on it with its ability, just casting instant sorceries, you can then flip it into the Primal Wellspring, which lets you copy cards as well. Now, you lose the lower cost, but you gain a copies card. I run this in my Slimes Against Humanity deck, and I think it's an absolutely fantastic card in any Spellslinger deck. Of course, upgrading your protection suite with stuff like Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots is a guaranteed, and if we're already putting in a lot of big mana cards that allow us to ramp fast, then throwing in a Pyromancer's Goggles so we have access to another way to copy spells would be helpful. And lowering the cost of our stuff is made even easier if you can toss in a Mind Splice Apparatus. Flash also helps the card a lot, because by having Flash, we have the ability to play it instead of a counter spell if we held things up. Baral also is another way to lower the cost of our cards, and he only costs 2 mana, so he is fantastic at that. Exalted Flamer of Tzeentch can allow us to recast all of the cards in our graveyard, basically at random, and then just, this card's fantastic in the deck. I wish that it didn't cost basically the deck's price to play it, but at the beginning of upkeep, put an instant or sorcery at random from your graveyard to your hand, and then when you cast an instant or sorcery spell, deal 1 damage to each opponent. It does everything you possibly could want a Spellslinger deck to do. It gives you your cards back, and they do work. 1000-Year Storm, of course, as you are upgrading the deck, it becomes easier to do the Storm off-style turns, so 1000-Year Storm is an obvious upgrade to move into. And then Passionate Archaeologist. Commander creatures have, whenever you cast a spell from exile, this creature deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to target opponent. All of our plotted cards gain extra power because of the Passionate Archaeologist. I would highly recommend this as one of the last upgrades you get in the deck, but once you have it, it gives you a very clear win condition for the deck. Every single time you cast a plotted spell, you get to poke somebody in the face for massive, massive damage. And with that, that is the entirety of my list and the upgrades for Lila. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Hopefully some of the editing errors don't cause too much of a headache for y'all. Thank you all for watching. I greatly appreciate it. And as always, everyone, insert end of video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability that Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I also would like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here, and they would be Red Joker, Blitzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Mabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, Sagitt, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.